Today, we're going to break down a really important court ruling out of India, and it tackles one of the toughest issues you can imagine, police brutality. But this isn't just a story about a crime. Oh no. It's about what happens when the very people sworn to protect us become the perpetrators. All right, let's get into it.
Everything in this story really comes down to this one number: 9.
That's right, 9 police officers. And what happened to them? Well, that's what makes this case absolutely historic. Every single one of them was sentenced to death. This is, without a doubt, one of the most severe judgments against law enforcement in the country's history. So you have to ask, what on earth did they do to get the ultimate punishment? Let's find out. Okay, so this whole case is about the deaths of a father and son, P. Jairaj and J. Benix, while they were in police custody. It happened in a town called Sathankulam in Tamil Nadu. And their story, it reveals this just chilling abuse of power that started with something unbelievably small. So picture this. It's 2020. India is in the middle of a super strict COVID lockdown. Jairaj and Benix, they run a little mobile phone shop. The police claimed they kept it open just a few minutes past curfew. That's it. A tiny argument over lockdown rules would kick off a chain of events that is just beyond horrific. So how in the world does a small argument escalate into 2 deaths? What actually happened over the next few days inside that Sathankulam police station is, well, it's deeply disturbing. So on June 19th, the police picked up the father, Jairaj. When his son, Benix, went to the station to see what was going on, he was detained too. What followed was just hours of systematic torture. The official report from the CBI, that's India's top investigative agency, said they were beaten with batons, sexually assaulted, just brutalized. By June 22nd, Benix was dead. And just one day later, his father Jairaj died too. And if you need to understand the sheer cruelty of what happened, this detail from the CBI report says it all. The officers made the father and son wipe their own blood off the floor. They were trying to destroy the evidence. This shows you it wasn't just some spontaneous act of violence. It was calculated. It was a cover-up right from the start. As you can imagine, when news of these deaths got out, people were furious. Public outrage just exploded, first across Tamil Nadu and then the whole country. The protests were so huge that the authorities were basically forced to make sure this case wasn't just going to be swept under the rug. The path to getting justice was really methodical. First, you had that massive public outcry demanding action. Then, the Madras High Court did something called suo motu cognizance, which basically means the case was so serious, they just stepped in on their own, without anyone even having to ask them. And then, and this was absolutely crucial, the investigation was handed over to the CBI, a federal agency. This was to make sure the local police weren't investigating their own people. You needed that unbiased inquiry. And the CBI, they built an absolutely rock-solid case. They found the victim's DNA on bloodstains on the station walls and on the batons used in the assault. The autopsy reports were crystal clear. They died from brutal physical assault, not from some heart condition like the defense tried to claim. But maybe the most powerful piece of evidence? A female constable from that very same station bravely testified against her own colleagues. Her testimony, along with 50 other eyewitnesses, just made the evidence overwhelming. So, with the officer's guilt pretty much established, the court had this other huge question to answer. Does this crime deserve the death penalty? In India, that is an incredibly high bar to clear. It's reserved for crimes that are said to, quote, shock the conscience of society. And that is the central legal question here. The Indian justice system uses capital punishment only for the most heinous, most terrible crimes. They call it the rarest of the rare. So why did this case qualify? So this whole idea comes from a famous Supreme Court case back in 1980, Bachchan Singh versus the state of Punjab. And that ruling basically said, look, the death penalty is legal, but it has to be the exception, not the rule. It can only be used when a crime is so diabolical that a life sentence just isn't enough, and when there's no hope that the person could ever be reformed. Okay, so here's the crucial part, how the court actually applied this idea. The factors against the officers, what lawyers call aggravating factors, were just immense. First, the perpetrators weren't your average criminals. They were police officers betraying public trust. The court saw that as an attack on the whole justice system. Second, the extreme, inhumane brutality of the torture was a huge factor. And finally, the fact that this all started over a minor violation, it was just a grotesque, fatal abuse of power. The defense's claims were completely demolished by the evidence, so the court was left to conclude that this act of protectors becoming perpetrators was in fact the very definition of the rarest of the rare.
And so the court in Madurai delivered its final two-part judgment. It was really designed to do two things: punish the guilty, but also to acknowledge the incredible loss the victim's family had suffered. The verdict was totally unambiguous. First, the death penalty for all 9 officers, but second, an order for the convicts to pay financial compensation directly to the family of Jayraj and Benix. So you see this dual approach, right? It combines the ultimate punishment with an act of, you could say, restorative justice.
And the amount wasn't small. The court ordered the 9 convicts to collectively pay 1.40 crore rupees, which is about $168,000 to the family. Now, this verdict goes way beyond just this one case. It has sent absolute shockwaves across the country, and a lot of people are looking at this as a potential turning point for police accountability in India. The message from the judge couldn't have been clearer. It was a powerful warning against the abuse of power. It basically reaffirmed a core principle: the law applies to everyone equally. And if you wear a uniform, you're going to be held to an even higher standard, and you will face the absolute severest consequences if you betray that trust. But of course, this leaves us with one final big question. While this verdict is a huge step for justice, is it an exception or is it the start of a new rule? Will this one judgment really be enough to stop future abuses of power and actually change the culture of policing in the country? Well, that remains to be seen.